I didn't hear you except through the house.
Hi.
Okay.
You hear that?
Yeah, I can hear that.
Okay.
Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. That's not our usual introduction, but just after I clicked the record button, my wife called because she did want to be part of our discussion tonight. Normally I call her ahead, but she asked to have me let her call me, and she picked that moment to call in, so that's what you got. And this is our Friday night Bible study for Friday, January 3rd, 2025. First Bible study of the new year. And we have been in the Old Testament for approximately a year now. We started it in January of 2024. And we have made it up to the book of 1 Samuel, which we plan to start tonight. Other than that, there's just not a whole lot going on around here. So, I think let's just go ahead and get started. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for all your blessings. We thank you for the written word. We thank you for others who share our view of your love and your character. And as we take a little time together to open the word and to examine what it says, we want to get clearer glimpses of the beauty of your character. And we know that in order for that to happen, we need the Holy Spirit to lead us where you want us to go. We want to be open to that, each of us individually. So we ask for that blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. So, let's go ahead and switch to our standard Friday night setup here. And we have 1 Samuel 1 already up in the Bible Gateway app. And I'm going to tell you that back in the 90s, in the mid 90s, I would guess mostly, I was teaching elementary school, but I was also during the summers going to the university, working toward a master's degree in the field of education. And this particular university had special programs that they ran in the summer for people who taught during the school year and could only take their university courses during the summer. And so I was there, I was part of that. While we were there, we attended the university church. And for those of you in the know, this is actually Pioneer Memorial Church. And they had a recently installed pastor there at the time, one Dwight Nelson. Dwight Nelson's strength was his ability to tell a story and make it engaging. He was the one from whom I first heard the interpretation of Daniel chapter 2 that said that Nebuchadnezzar didn't forget his dream, but rather he refused to tell his sorcerers and wise men what the dream was, to test if they really had a connection with the gods. And in that light, there's a line in that passage that's quite telling. Because at some point, they finally just up and admit to the king, only the gods could do that, and the gods don't dwell among men. We really don't have that divine connection we've been claiming we had. And Nebuchadnezzar, a very new and young king, thought, well, why am I spending all this out of the royal treasury to pay these people if they can't really do me any good? And in those days, given the violence of the times, you didn't fire them, you executed them. And so the order went out to execute all of them. And of course, you know the story. Daniel asked for time. He did have a connection with divinity, and he was able to accurately tell the dream. And as he told the dream, the king knew, wait a minute, this guy has something, because he's telling me the dream I actually had. Anyway, it was about that time that my wife pointed something out about this first chapter in the book of 1 Samuel. So as we read through it, we're going to look at a number of clues to what we decided this was really telling us, and see if you maybe agree with us that there are enough clues there to reach the conclusion that we did. A rather unique and not usually heard take on the story of Hannah and Elkanah and Samuel. So we begin chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man named Elkanah who lived in Ramah in the region of Zuph in the hill country of Ephraim. Now we've run across Ramah before in the book of Judges. And so now it's going to become the hometown at least, of Samuel. Now, they have saying here that name is as in the Greek version or the Septuagint. The Hebrew reads in Ramathaim Zophim. And compare verse 19 later on down. So, he was the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph of Ephraim. So maybe that's why they consider the region Zuph. It was a region inhabited by the descendants of this Zuph, a number of generations down. And he was a member of the tribe of Ephraim. Recall that Ephraim is one of the two sons of Joseph, and they became tribes along with their uncles' families in Israel. And while that splits Joseph up into two, making for 13 tribes, the tribe of Levi doesn't get counted after that because they served as priests. So there were still 12 tribes, not counting Levi, because of the division of Joseph into Manasseh and Ephraim. Elkanah had two wives, Hanna and Penninah. Penninah had children, but Hannah did not. Now that's our first clue.
No, the first clue is Elkanah had two wives.
Well, yeah, okay. The element of that we want to look at comes just a little bit later.
No woman wants to have to share her man.
But back in those days, it happened all the time.
Doesn't mean they wanted it.
No, it doesn't. But, yeah.
Look how Jacob's wife acted.
Yeah. Each year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of Heaven's armies at the tabernacle. And I'm guessing that's their way of translating Yahweh, El Shaddai, often translated the Lord of Hosts. They're choosing to translate the Lord of Heaven's armies. And he's worshiping and sacrificing at the tabernacle. So the tabernacle was set up there at Shiloh. The priests of the Lord at that time were the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. On the days Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to Penninah and each of her children. And though he loved Hanna, he would give her only one choice portion because the Lord had given her no children. Now, there's a footnote on that, and once we check the footnote, then we'll say something else about that verse. The footnote says, and because he loved Hanna, he would give her a choice portion. The meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. So it suggests that because she had no children, he would give her the best, because what he gave to Penninah, he also had to divide up with her children.
What version are you reading?
This is the New Living Translation we've been reading all along.
Look at a different translation. It will tell you he gave her a double portion.
Well, I think you're right about that. So let me get the NIV open here. That's the one we usually read it from. Well, yeah, the NIV says a double portion. Let's see what the King James says. Got to get the pages open to that. The King James says, but unto Hanna he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hanna, but the Lord had shut up her womb. Just for the fun of it, let me look up worthy here in the Young's Analytical Concordance and see where it comes from, and see if we can tell why the NIV might have rendered it double. Worthy. Well, that's interesting. They say that the Hebrew is af. It means faces.
Means what?
Faces. Like I say, the translators of this version say that the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. Let's see if the NIV says anything about that, because they do sometimes note when they believe that the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. No, they don't have a note for that. Interesting. So, double portion is the version that we read back in the 90s, and that helped us reach, just one clue in helping us reach the conclusion we reached. So, Penninah would taunt Hanna and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children. Well, we're going to suggest something else actually kept her from having children, but the writers, being Hebrew and thinking like they did, would have said, well, it happened, therefore the Lord did it, that kind of thinking. Year after year it was the same. Penninah would taunt Hanna as they went to the tabernacle. And the house of the Lord, also in verse 24. Okay. Each year, Hanna would be reduced to tears and would not even eat. There's another clue. Now, one thing becomes pretty clear here. Penninah was an insensitive person. She was toxic in her way. because she had succumbed to the cultural expectation that the value of a woman was in having sons for her husband to pass his line on. And if she didn't have sons, she wasn't fulfilling her goal. She was worth less. And so Penninah would make a big deal about that in order to inflate her own ego, because she had given Elkanah children and Hannah hadn't. So in her mind, that was how she was superior to her sister wife, if you want to think of it that way. And she acted that out by abusing Hannah, the other wife.
But that's not excusing her. She herself was in the same situation as Hannah, and that she was having to share her man.
Well, yes, obviously.
And it says that Hannah was the favorite.
Does it?
I believe so.
Well, let's see here. He had two wives. Penninah had children, but Hannah did not. And that kind of recalls the story of Jacob, because he loved Rachel, but Rachel wasn't having children, and Leah was. And so now we have Elkanah. He has two wives. One has children, one does not. And he seems, in some senses, to prefer Hannah, even though she doesn't have children, in that he's giving her either the double portion or the worthy portion, the choice portion, whatever the Hebrew actually meant there. There's a suggestion, at least, that he was giving her a favorable treatment when he brought back the meat from the sacrificial animals. Now comes the really tough part. Why are you crying, Hannah? Elkanah would ask. Why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons? Sounds like insensitivity kind of runs in the family. You didn't want to say something about Elkanah's approach?
Well, I was looking it up here. I've got Young's literal translation open.
Okay.
And to Hannah, he giveth a certain portion, double. For he hath loved Hannah, and Jehovah hath shut her womb. That version says double.
Yeah.
According to this, he's showing favoritism to Hannah because he loved her.
Yes.
Maybe he felt pity.
Maybe.
And Penninah sees this and feels jealous.
So she becomes mean.
So when he's not looking, she becomes mean.
Yeah. Now, I was asking you about verse 8 here. Do I need to read it again?
I'm looking there.
It is what Elkanah would say to Hannah whenever this happened.
Why weepest thou? And why dost thou not eat? And why is thy heart afflicted? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? No, you're not. Your value in that culture was not found in your husband. Your value was found in how many sons you provided.
Well, yeah, we've already kind of mentioned that.
She had absolutely no value to anybody except him, who was appeasing her by feeding her.
Yeah.
Appeasing by feeding. And there's more news to it coming.
Yeah. Once, after a sacrificial meal at
Complex trauma. Complex trauma is a situation that you find yourself in that you cannot rectify.
Yeah. Hannah couldn't convince Elkanah to get rid of Penninah, particularly since she was the one who had the children. And so she had to live with this toxic woman in the house, making her life miserable. And, a woman couldn't just divorce her husband and go live on her own. That wasn't, the society just wasn't set up for that. So she would have been in very difficult circumstances. So the husband kind of had all the cards in that case. And while he could divorce his wife, there was no provision for a wife to divorce her husband anyway. And it would have been very hard on the wife had she left him, even if she didn't go about the divorce. So she didn't have a way out of that situation.
And complex trauma does a lot of damage to your brain and body. It ties up your brain where your brain can't function to take care of your body, and it slowly kills you.
Yeah.
And it sets up addiction. She's going to food for comfort. And it says right there, her husband loves her, so he's feeding her double.
Yeah. Once, after a sacrificial meal at Shiloh, Hannah got up and went to pray. Eli the priest was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle, or again the house of the Lord. Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow, O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. And footnote E there, some manuscripts add he will drink neither wine nor intoxicants. Now, that doesn't specifically say it like it did with Samson, but essentially Hannah is committing her unborn, unconceived as of yet son to be a Nazirite, dedicated like Samson for his entire lifetime. And the manuscripts that mention that he would not have wine or other intoxicants is just an application of the rest of the Nazirite vows, because the Nazirites during the time of their vow did not drink fermented beverages. In fact, They were so careful about it, they also avoided raisins, if I recall correctly. As she was praying to the Lord, Eli watched her. Seeing her lips moving but hearing no sound, he thought she had been drinking. And now his righteous indignation and misplaced zeal for the Lord's house comes to the front, and he says to her, "Must you come here drunk?" he demanded. "Throw away your wine." "Oh, no, sir," she replied. "I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I am very discouraged, and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I am a wicked woman, for I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow." Well, while in the end we'll have a rather negative conclusion about Eli, we can say this for him. He didn't insist on his toxicity when the lie he was basing it on gets revealed and exposed. He is willing to change his mind and to change his approach based on new information. He thought she was drunk, that's why she was there mouthing the words but not actually saying anything. And there may have been other clues that he read as intoxication. But she tells him what's going on, and he accepts it. And he changes his approach to her. In that case, Eli said, "Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of him." "Oh, thank you, sir," she exclaimed. Then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad.
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute, what?
Right. She got up and left because she was being bullied. I'm going to pull this up in the NIV. This Young's literal is difficult to read.
Yeah.
Because I'm used to it in the NIV, and I think it says something. Okay, there we go. There we go. Back up to verse 9.
Wow.
When they finished eating and drinking, Hannah got up and went to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she had just presumably she had either just eaten a double portion or she was too upset to eat. They had just finished eating. So what happens? She gets told that her prayer is going to be answered, meaning she's going to be given a son, which will mean she now has value, or she will have at that point value as a human being. So, she believes Eli, the stress level drops, And what does she do?
She goes back and begins to eat.
And let's remember, she's getting a double portion.
Yeah. The entire family got up early the next morning and went to worship the Lord once more. Then they returned home to Ramah. When Elkanah slept with Hannah, the Lord remembered her plea, and in due time she gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I asked the Lord for him. And the footnote there tells us that Samuel sounds like the Hebrew term for asked of God or heard by God.
So, according to my interpretation, Hannah was being bullied. She was in a situation she could not get free of. It set her in a place where she was experiencing complex trauma, which set her up for food addiction. Most likely, she was overweight, possibly to the point that this was interfering with her. This and the stress caused by Penninah's bullying and society's bullying caused her to be unable to conceive due to the stress load and possibly even the weight.
Well, yeah, because the weight does tend to absorb and thus reduce the serum level of the female hormones, and so that can in fact interfere with reproduction. So, from the clues that we found in this chapter, we have concluded that Hannah had a food addiction. And a food addiction isn't just eat because I'm addicted to food. It can also include not eating when you're in a particular emotional state. You have an unhealthy relationship with food that can include eating, but it can also include not eating.
It can also include bulimia.
Right. The next year, Elkanah and his family went on their annual trip to offer a sacrifice to the Lord and to keep his vow. But Hannah did not go. She told her husband, wait until the boy is weaned. Then I will take him to the tabernacle and leave him there with the Lord permanently. Footnote G. Some manuscripts add, I will offer him as a Nazirite for all time. So it's possible that that was added by people who knew about the Nazirite provision in Hebrew culture and interpreted that into what's being said in the original manuscripts. Whatever you think is best, Elkanah agreed. Stay here for now, and may the Lord help you keep your promise. Or that they've done that as in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Greek version, the Masoretic text reads, may the Lord keep his promise. So she stayed home and nursed the boy until he was weaned. When the child was weaned, Hannah took him to the tabernacle in Shiloh. They brought along a 3-year-old bull for the sacrifice and a basket of flour and some wine. After sacrificing the bull, they brought the boy to Eli. Sir, do you remember me? Hannah asked. I am the very woman who stood here several years ago praying to the Lord. I asked the Lord to give me this boy, and he has granted my request. Now I am giving him to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord his whole life. And they worshiped the Lord there. Footnote for they, he. They, he. What to say? The Hebrew reads he. Okay. Now, always had it stuck in my head, and maybe another version will say that Samuel was 3 when he was weaned and taken to Shiloh. But that may just be somebody's interpretation.
Now, to further, there's more evidence to what we were saying why she couldn't have children. And that comes in chapter 2, verse 20.
20? Did you say verse 20?
Yes.
Well, we'll talk about it when we get there. We're not there yet. We're just winding up chapter 1 here, saying that when the boy was weaned, Hannah took him to Shiloh and presented him to Eli, told the story, which Eli no doubt remembered, and said she was going to leave the boy there with Eli so that he could belong to the Lord his whole life. Then Hannah prayed, and this is in the form of Hebrew poetry. And so here's a section where it's very explicit that this is a part of the Bible written by a woman. My heart rejoices in the Lord. The Lord has made me strong. Footnote A for the word strong there, has exalted my horn. The horn in that culture was a symbol of strength. And so this version has interpreted that and read it this way rather than the way it actually reads in the Hebrew. Now I have an answer for my enemies. I rejoice because you rescued me. Who was her primary enemy?
Society.
Who?
Society.
Society. Well, to some extent, yes. But she also had a very personal and direct enemy in Penninah. But
Well,
now,
society set it up where she would be in a position that Penninah would be there. As in 2 wives. But yeah, you're right. And Elkanah, even though he loved her, was abusing her. What's the matter with you? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? No, you don't.
no one is holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Stop acting so proud and haughty. Don't speak with such arrogance. For the Lord is a God who knows what you have done. He will judge your actions. The bow of the mighty is now broken, and those who stumbled are now strong. Those who were well fed are now starving, and those who were starving are now full. And the sentiments here in this psalm, if you wish to think of it that way, are very similar to the sentiments in Mary's psalm as recorded in the book of Luke. How under God, the people who in this world think of themselves as strong and well-to-do and in favor with God, actually, in heaven's view, are not that way, and so things get reversed. The high places cut down low, the low places filled in to be high, to equalize things and make a flat and level path. In this case, the mighty have their bow broken, but the ones who used to stumble are now strong, starving and full. The childless woman now has 7 children, and the woman with many children wastes away. Well, that's very specific to Hannah's situation. The Lord gives both death and life. Well, that's her view. We don't agree with that, but he brings some down to the grave, but raises others up. The Lord makes some poor and others rich. He brings some down and lifts others up. He lifts the poor from the dust and the needy from the garbage dump. He sets them among princes, placing them in seats of honor. For all the earth is the Lord's, and he has set the world in order.
In other words, Hannah is now acting the way Penninah did.
To some extent, yes. There's no indication if she taunted Penninah now that she had a son, but at least she had an answer for Penninah.
Look at that.
Look,
She who was barren has borne 7 children, but she who has had many sons pines away.
yeah.
In other words, and down there, verse 21 says that Hannah had more children.
Yeah, we'll be getting there.
So that poem right there shows that Hannah's now acting like Penninah acted.
To some extent, yes. He will protect his faithful ones, but the wicked will disappear in darkness. Now, here's the old covenant mindset. By the way, now that I've read this, it reminds me we do have a sermon presentation to put up tomorrow. The plan is to get it recorded and have it post at 11 o'clock Central Time so that you'll be able to see it on this group. And if any of you see these studies on YouTube, the sermon presentations do not get uploaded to YouTube because the idea of the YouTube channel is to have a Through the Bible series of these Friday night Bible studies. And those sermon presentations don't fit in. So you would have to come to the group, In Vain Do They Worship Me, on Facebook in order to see the sermon presentation. But it will discuss, to some extent, this issue of the Psalms in the Old Testament that talk about, well, that they seem to teach the prosperity gospel. He will protect his faithful ones, but the wicked will disappear in darkness. That's old covenant thinking, because that was the old covenant. You obey me, I bless you. You disobey me, I curse you. And so they tended to think of reality in terms of that old covenant. But that old covenant applied only to Israel, not to the rest of the world. No one will succeed by strength alone. Those who fight against the Lord will be shattered. He thunders against them from heaven. The Lord judges throughout the earth. He gives power to his king. He increases the strength of his anointed one. And footnote C for that strength, again, that exalts the horn. They have chosen to render it like that. Then Elkanah returned home to Ramah without Samuel, and the boys served the Lord by assisting Eli the priest. Now, Samuel was from the tribe of Ephraim. He could not be a priest, but he could be a servant to the priest, and apparently that's the vision that Hannah had for him. Turns out God had a bigger plan for him, but for now, that's his role. And now we take a bit of a detour on our story. Hannah, we've read the story of Hannah, Penninah, and Elkanah, and of their children, and of Hannah's situation. Now she's had this son, Samuel, and she has delivered him as she promised to Shiloh to serve the Lord by assisting Eli. So now we kind of step sideways and talk a little bit about Eli's family. Now, you will recall that earlier, the chapter 1 named his sons as priests. They were the sons of Eli, but they were serving as priests in Shiloh. But now, the author tells us the sons of Eli were scoundrels who had no respect for the Lord or for their duties as priests. You ever run across a toxic clergyman?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's going to tell us stories here that indicates that these two clergymen, in the sense that the Hebrews had that in their day, how toxic they are and what their behavior is like.
I ran across a website that had done a study into narcissists, and they made a list of the top professions, the top 10 professions that a narcissist would go into. And pastor was one of those that made that list.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, because our
Where it was understood.
in our culture, there's an expectation that the clergyman has the role of instructing his parishioners how to live. Well, that's a position of power. And narcissists are drawn to positions that they perceive as power. Unfortunately, when they get power, they tend to abuse it and abuse the people that they see as being under their authority and power. Remember the preacher who was so big on authority?
Which one?
A whole bunch of them, actually, probably.
No, I don't get along well with pastors.
Yeah. Too many bad experiences.
Way too many.
Whenever anyone offered a sacrifice, Eli's sons would send over a servant with a three-pronged fork. While the meat of the sacrificed animal was still boiling, the servant would stick the fork into the pot and demand that whatever it brought up be given to Eli's sons. All the Israelites who came to worship at Shiloh were treated this way. Sometimes the servant would come even before the animal's fat had been burned on the altar. He would demand raw meat before it had been boiled so that it could be used for roasting. The man offering the sacrifice might reply, "Take as much as you want, but the fat must be burned first." Then the servant would demand, "No, give it to me now, or I'll take it by force." So the sin of these young men was very serious in the Lord's sight, for they treated the Lord's offering with contempt. Now, what does that tell us? Because we're getting a glimpse here of something I think it's important for us to understand. In the book of Leviticus, and we probably didn't read it and talk about it very much because we kind of skipped through Leviticus without spending a lot of time on the details of it. One of the instructions they were given was that when they offered an animal for sacrifices, the fat had to be burned, was not to be eaten. Now, some people take it that meant that the Israelites were not to eat fat ever. I take it as when they offered a sacrifice, they were not to eat the fat. Otherwise, they probably did. Now, that interpretation, I heard this years ago from somebody I won't name, that God was telling them not to eat the fat ever, suggests that somehow the fat is a bad thing that you shouldn't eat. But now let's think of it this way. When the people brought an animal for a sacrifice, they were to bring the animals that they wouldn't want to eat otherwise. Is that what it was? What is that how it went?
No.
What were they supposed to bring?
Best.
The very best. So now when an animal is sacrificed, the command is offer the fat to me. What part of the animal is God demanding? The bad part or the best part?
Best.
Yeah. And the sons are treating this this symbol, this example of giving the best to God with content by saying, no, we're gonna get it. We want the meat with the fat on it, even though it's been offered as a sacrifice. And so the text says they treated the Lord's offerings with content. They kept the best for themselves rather than giving it to God as the sacrificial system demanded. But Samuel, though he was only a boy, served the Lord.
Wait.
Wait for what?
They're demanding upon threat of bodily harm. They are forcibly taking this stuff.
Yes.
Go back to what God says about giving tithe. God loves a
Cheerful.
giver. Would that not include their other offerings? He wants you to give cheerfully. He doesn't want it taken from you by force.
Well, definitely not. And that's another way in which they treated the offerings with contempt, because they were making it onerous for the people.
And what does that say about God when they do that?
Well, it says that God's exacting and demanding and likely to use force if he doesn't get what he wants.
So what does it say about God when you teach people God hates homosexuals and he's going to burn you in hell if you don't hate homosexuals or any other sinner, as far as that goes?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a particular clerk that made the news years ago.
Right.
I believe her name was Kim Davis.
Right.
What message did she give to the world about God? How many people out there were able to realize that God and the church are not the same thing? Sorry, I tend to get up on the soapbox.
But Samuel, though he was only a boy, served the Lord. He wore a linen garment like that of a priest. Footnote D. He wore a linen ephod, and an ephod was a very simple covering, and we'll have reason to relate to that in future. Each year his mother made a small coat for him and brought it to him when she came with her husband for the sacrifice. Before they returned home, Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord give you other children to take the place of this one she gave to the Lord." Footnote E there. That's as in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Greek version. The Masoretic text reads, This one he requested of the Lord. And the Lord blessed Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. Now, you said there was something in verse 20. It was also a clue. What was it?
That she had more children.
Well, yeah, but before that, you said there was another clue in verse 20.
It was actually verse 21.
Okay.
And it's the clue is that she had more children. So that would be a clue that the problem was not infertility.
No. So you're suggesting that, in fact, perhaps she may even have lost some weight, making it easier for her to bear children?
Well, I don't know that it would be the weight. It's possible. But food addiction's more to it than just needing food for comfort. She's still being bullied, so she's still going to be turning to food. However, she's got this promise, so the stress level isn't as high as it has been.
Right.
Stress is a killer of unborn babies.
Also, she does have an answer which may have served to some extent to make Penninah be less vicious about her attacks, thereby also reducing Hannah's stress.
I don't know. If Penninah knows about that promise, she may have become even more vicious.
Well, yeah, the thing is, once Hannah receives the promise, Penninah doesn't get mentioned anymore. We don't know what happened to her. We assume she continued to live and her children were considered some of Elkanah's children, but...
Well, according to that poem, Penninah pined away.
Well, yeah.
Never had any effect on Hannah. She no longer had anything to get in Hannah's face about.
Possibly, yeah. Now, Eli was very old, but he was aware of what his sons were doing to the people of Israel. He knew, for instance, that his sons were seducing the young women who assisted at the entrance of the tabernacle. Footnote F, the tent of meeting, and some manuscripts lack this entire sentence. Well, you can see in a prudish society why they might want to leave that detail out. But I think most modern versions do include that detail, that they were not just being greedy about the food, they were also helping themselves to the women.
Wasn't one of them expecting to become a father through his wife?
One of Eli's sons?
Yeah. Or was that Aaron's son? Somebody's son that got killed in the line of duty had a wife that was pregnant. I don't remember if it was Eli or Aaron.
Well, I think you're thinking about an element of this story that we may get to yet this evening, um, when the ark is captured.
Yeah.
Now, Eli goes to his sons and he said to them, I have been hearing reports from all the people about the wicked things you are doing. Why do you keep on sinning? You must stop, my sons. The reports I hear among the Lord's people are not good. If someone sins against another person, God can mediate for the guilty party. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede? Now, this suggests to me that Eli has some misunderstandings about God, but that was common in his day, and probably everybody thought kind of like he did. And let's see, there's a footnote there for the word God, or the judges. Well, that might make more sense. If you sin against the judges, against another person, the judges can intervene, mediate, and maybe they can do something about it. But what are the judges going to do if you sin against God? But Eli's sons wouldn't listen to their father, for the Lord was already planning to put them to death. Well, again, it wasn't God's idea. God just knew it would happen. But in the Hebrew mindset, again, if it happened, God did it. So we know that eventually these young men or older men, whatever age they were, these men died. And therefore, in the Hebrew mind, God did it. So when they don't listen to their father, well, that's God's doing, making it so that he can kill them.
Kind of presumptuous.
Well, that's a very negative view of God, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, God doesn't like you, so he's going to set you up to fail so he can zap you.
That's looking at God through human failings.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew taller and grew in favor with the Lord and with the people. What does that verse sound like? You ever heard of Luke 2:52?
I don't know.
Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew taller and grew in favor with the Lord and with the people. Interesting. One day, a man of God, this is an unnamed prophet, came to Eli and gave him this message from the Lord. I revealed myself to your ancestors when they were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt. And the myself has the footnote H there, which says, that's as in the Greek and Syriac versions, the Hebrew reads, did I reveal myself? Okay. I chose your ancestor Aaron, or your father. Does that mean your father Aaron, or I chose your father? That's in verse 27.
Well, it could say father meaning grandfather.
Yeah. Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father, this is the King James Version, when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon mine altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? I chose your ancestor Aaron from among all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer sacrifices on my altar, to burn incense, and to wear the priestly vest, or the linen ephod as he served me. Is that what the J is? Yeah, an ephod before me. And I assigned the sacrificial offerings to you as priests. So why do you scorn my sacrifices and offerings? Why do you give your sons more honor than you give me? For you and they have become fat from the best offerings of my people Israel. Well, the offerings were for the priests, but there were limitations on it, and they couldn't just get what they wanted. They had to take what was offered. Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, says, I promise that your branch of the tribe of Levi would always be my priest. Your house and your father's house is what the Hebrew says there. So they're interpreting it and making it the tribe of Levi. But he may have been more specific, not just the tribe of Levi, but the clans of Aaron, and more directly, the clans of Aaron descended from Eleazar and Phinehas. Therefore, let's see. I promise that your branch, the tribe of Levi, would always be my priests. But I will honor those who honor me, and I will despise those who think lightly of me. Old covenant thinking again. The time is coming when I will put an end to your family, so it will no longer serve as my priests. All the members of your family will die before their time. None will reach old age. You will watch with envy as I pour out prosperity on the people of Israel. But no members of your family will ever live out their days. The few not cut off from serving at my altar will survive, but only so their eyes can go blind and their hearts break, and their children will die a violent death. And that's as in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Greek version, which read die by the sword. The Masoretic text reads die like mortals. And I gathered from this that the Masoretic text is the Hebrew outside of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And to prove that what I have said will come true, I will cause your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, to die on the same day. Then I will raise up a faithful priest who will serve me and do what I desire. I will establish his family, and they will be priests to my anointed kings forever. Then all of your surviving family will bow before him, begging for money and food. Please, they will say, give us jobs among the priests, so we will have enough to eat. So, these are the words of the unnamed prophet who came to deliver a message to Eli about the things that are taking place under his watch, shall we say. He was the, shall we say, senior high priest. His sons served as priests. One of them would have succeeded him as high priest when he died, assuming they outlived him, but in fact they didn't, as we will see as we continue this story. Oh, okay, I was just checking my timer there. It looked wrong, but it's good. Chapter 3. The Lord speaks to Samuel. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel served the Lord by assisting Eli. Now, in those days, messages from the Lord were very rare, and visions were quite uncommon. One night, Eli, who was almost blind by now, had gone to bed. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping at the tabernacle near the ark of God. Suddenly the Lord called out, "Samuel." "Yes," Samuel replied. "What is it?" He got up and ran to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" "I didn't call you," Eli replied. "Go back to bed." So he did. Then the Lord called out again, "Samuel." Again Samuel got up and went to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" "I didn't call you, my son," Eli said. "Go back to bed." Samuel did not yet know the Lord because he had never had a message from the Lord before. So the Lord called a third time, and once more Samuel got up and went to Eli. "Here I am. Did you call me?" Then Eli realized it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So he said to Samuel, "Go and lie down again, and if someone calls again, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant is listening.'" Now here's another positive in the story of Eli. He was willing to change his mind when he first thought that Hannah was drunk. When he heard the truth, he changed his mind. He changed his attitude toward her and his behavior toward her. So there was that in his favor, that he had an openness of mind to allow him to change course when he realizes he's been wrong. Now he has the insight that rather than getting mad at Samuel for keep coming and waking him up all night long, that something's going on here. This boy isn't doing this maliciously. He's hearing something, and I know it's not me, so who can it be but God himself? And so he gives Samuel the instructions to respond willingly if he gets another call. So Samuel went back to bed. And the Lord came and called as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel replied, "Speak, your servant is listening." Then the Lord said to Samuel, "I am about to do a shocking thing in Israel. I am going to carry out all my threats against Eli and his family from beginning to end. I have warned him that judgment is coming upon his family forever because his sons are blaspheming God and he hasn't disciplined them." Footnote B there says, as in the Greek version, the Hebrew reads, "His sons have made themselves contemptible." Okay, yeah, there's a bit of interpretation probably going on in the Greek version to say that they're blaspheming God. But we already know that they are making the worship of God obnoxious in the eyes of the people by their behavior. And this is ruining God's reputation with the people. And what God said to Samuel may have been interpreted somewhat by the writer, who would have cast his view of God on what God had said to Samuel. What I think should be clear to us is that God is about to act in his wrath, and God's wrath is to step aside and let us have what we want, even though it's not good for us. So he is about to step aside to allow the toxicity of Eli's sons to come back on them and cause them, well, ultimately cause their death.
Before you go there, there's a little bit more to give hint of what's going on with these sons.
What is that?
Now, I don't know if this is in the Bible or if it's in Ellen White. So, doesn't it say that Eli was a fat man?
Yeah, I think it might.
He fell off the stool
Broke his neck.
and yeah, and doesn't it say that he was uh, weight challenged?
Well,
In which case, if that be the case, if he had a weight problem, there's a good possibility that he was dealing with food addiction. And again, I said before, addiction tends to be set up by having dealt with trauma in your past.
mm-hmm. Okay, well, chapter 4, verse 18, I'm going to read it out of King James because that's what I happen to have open here. And it came to pass, when he made mention of the ark of God, that he fell from off the seat backward by the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died, for he was an old man and heavy, and he had judged Israel 40 years. Now that's interesting because up until this point, the high priest had never served as judge, but apparently Eli did. Now, we stopped off at verse 13 where it says he hasn't disciplined them. I'm going to tell you, both now and later when we get to the end of the story of Samuel, that what actually would have been required of him here and why I think he didn't do what he needed to do. So I have vowed that the sins of Eli and his sons will never be forgiven by sacrifices or offerings. Samuel stayed in bed until morning, then got up and opened the doors of the tabernacle as usual. He was afraid to tell Eli what the Lord had said to him, but Eli called out to him, "Samuel, my son." "Here I am," Samuel replied. "What did the Lord say to you? Tell me everything. And may God strike you and even kill you if you hide anything from me." Well, that's a little bit overboard, but he wasn't.
Judge in Houston.
What?
Now back to the judge in Houston. Somebody did threaten to kill his child and the child's mother. And the judge went ballistic on that guy.
Didn't he get his bond revoked and end up having to be remanded to jail?
I didn't watch it. I just saw the caption.
I think he may have. I heard him. We're talking about this Hispanic Heritage judge in Harris County. Harris County is the county around Houston.
Freshman?
Uh, Fleischer,
Fletcher.
Judge Fleischer. Yeah, he doesn't wear a robe most of the time. He wears a bow tie and jackets, and sometimes they're kind of colorful. And he's a very intense personality. Now he's not. If you pay attention, he's not particularly mean, but he sounds like it because he is very intense, and he'll warn them, and he'll use terms like, "I'll send you to prison and you'll be stuck like Chuck." That's one of his favorite little terms. And he'll give them very stern warnings about what might happen to them if they end up going to jail. If you don't have a Texas license, don't drive. You're going to sit down, you're going to fill out an affidavit promising me that you won't drive. So he's very intense, but I think he does that because he's trying to give people bonds to get them out of jail until their court case is over, and he wants to strongly impress them that they better live up to the conditions of their bond. And so he speaks quite forcefully. Anyway, we kind of got off on that.
Samuel threatened to kill the boy.
No, Eli did.
Oh, well, yeah.
May God strike you and even kill you if you hide anything from me. He's being abusive.
In the name of the Lord.
Yeah. So Samuel told Eli everything. He didn't hold anything back. It is the Lord's will, Eli replied. Let him do what he thinks best. But God is sending warnings to Eli. You need to take action about your sons. You need to remove them from office so they cannot continue to misrepresent me to the people. And Eli is like, oh, these terrible things are going to happen. Let the Lord do whatever he wants to do.
It's easier to herd cats than it is to control your children.
Yeah.
If you don't train them when they're young.
Right. Well, like I say, what he should have done is he should have removed them from the priestly office and says, you can do what you want, but you can't be priest any longer.
They may accept it.
Once they're adults, it's not his business to control them. But he can set limits and say, here are the consequences if you don't live up to the expectation.
But they may have just kept coming and demanding that, they could have taken Daddy out. They were wicked men.
Well, they could have, but like I say, when we get a little further on, we're going to see what happened in the case of Samuel. A lot of people like to say, well, Samuel's a good man, Eli was a bad man because Eli didn't discipline his sons. But guess what? Samuel's sons turned out bad too.
Samuel was raised by Eli.
To some extent, he was, yes.
Eli.
As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him, and everything Samuel did proved to be reliable. And all Israel, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, knew that Samuel was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh and gave messages to Samuel there at the tabernacle. So this first message is just the first of many. And over time, Samuel gains a reputation as someone who's able to speak for Yahweh.
Samuel had a mother who believed in the Lord and put her faith in the Lord, and she was able to transfer at least some of that to her son.
And God did more with her gift than she ever expected. She just expected him to serve there at the temple and be a servant to the priest. And God said, guess what? I got something more I want you to do. Go ahead.
Samuel raised and learned how to parent from a man who was not fit to be a parent.
Well, that could be. It could be that in both cases it was less how the children were raised as just the fact that they were human, and humans can go bad. Even if they are raised more or less well. Well, we've got a few minutes here, not very many. We'll go into chapter 4. I don't know how far we'll get. It says, and Samuel's words went out to all the people of Israel. At that time, Israel was at war with the Philistines. Well, they've been that way for a long time. This apparently carries on at least from the days of Samson, when the Philistines oppressed the Israelites. The Israelite army was camped near Ebenezer, and the Philistines were at Aphek. The Philistines attacked and defeated the army of Israel, killing 4,000 men. After the battle was over, the troops retreated to their camp, and the elders of Israel asked, why did the Lord allow us to be defeated by the Philistines? Well, it's possible. The Philistines just had a better army than the Israelites did at that point. It wasn't necessarily the Lord's doing, but that's how they think of it. So then they said, let's bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh. If we carry it into battle with us, it will save us from our enemies. Footnote A, he, God. In other words, let's take our symbol of God with us, and that way we'll have God with us in our battle. Well, this had never been done before.
It's our symbol of God, in other words, an idol.
Yeah. Well, they were treating it like an idol, just like the nations around them would take idols with them into battle to indicate that their gods were with them. Now the Israelites want to try the same. So they sent men to Shiloh to bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord of heaven's armies, who's enthroned between the cherubim. Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, were also there with the ark of the covenant of God. When all the Israelites saw the ark of the covenant of the Lord coming into the camp, their shout of joy was so loud it made the ground shake. What's going on? The Philistines asked. What's all the shouting about in the Hebrew camp? When they were told it was because the ark of the Lord had arrived, they panicked. The gods have come into their camp, they cried. Footnote B, a god has. All right. Well, they were polytheistic probably, so yeah, the gods. This is a disaster. We've never had to face anything like this before. Help! Who can save us from these mighty gods of Israel? They are the same gods who destroyed the Egyptians with plagues when Israel was in the wilderness. Fight as never before, Philistines. If you don't, we will become the Hebrew slaves just as they have been ours. Stand up like men and fight. So the Philistines fought desperately, and Israel was defeated again. The slaughter was great. 30,000 Israelite soldiers died that day. The survivors turned and fled to their tents. The ark of God was captured, and Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were killed. Might I say that this is a warning against mystical thinking. The Israelites had begun to think mystically about the symbols of God. The Ark of the Covenant was somehow a magic talisman that they could take with them to represent God and to make them victorious in battle. But God is saying, that gold chest is just a symbol. And so he allows it to be captured and the Israelite army to be defeated. A man from the tribe of Benjamin ran from the battlefield and arrived at Shiloh later that same day. He had torn his clothes and put dust on his head to show his grief. Eli was waiting beside the road to hear the news of the battle, for his heart trembled for the safety of the ark of God. When the messenger arrived and told what had happened, an outcry resounded throughout the town. "What is all the noise about?" Eli asked. The messenger rushed over to Eli, who was 98 years old and blind. He said to Eli, "I have just come from the battlefield. I was there this very day." "What happened, my son?" Eli demanded. "Israel has been defeated by the Philistines," the messenger replied. "The people have been slaughtered, and your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were also killed. And the ark of God has been captured." When the messenger mentioned what had happened to the ark of God, Eli fell backwards from his seat beside the gate. He broke his neck and died, for he was old and overweight. He had been Israel's judge for 40 years. Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant and near her time of delivery. When she heard that the ark of God had been captured and that her father-in-law and husband were dead, she went into labor and gave birth. She died in childbirth, but before she passed away, the midwives tried to encourage her. "Don't be afraid," they said. "You have a baby boy." but she was dying, so she did not answer or pay attention to them. She named the child Ichabod, which means, where is the glory? For she said, Israel's glory is gone. She named him this because the ark of God had been captured and because her father-in-law and husband were dead. Then she said, the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. And that's the story of Ichabod. And the name will get used later in English literature in the story of Ichabod Crane, which was a very negative character because of the connotations of this story, that this child got his name from the Hebrew for where is the glory. And so chapter 4 ends on a negative note, and that's where we're going to end. We've run just a minute or so over here. And again, as I said before, we do have a sermon presentation that we plan to put up and post, schedule the post for 11 o'clock Central Time on Saturday the 4th of January. Again, 2025. Years keep marching on. Anything to say before we close off?
Good night.
All right. So, until either tomorrow or until next week, whenever you choose to join us again, we say goodbye and God bless.